The sun hung low over the horizon like a dying ember, painting the dusty main street of Cedar Ridge in shades of copper and rust. It was the kind of evening that made the desert seem endless, stretching beyond the weathered storefronts and ramshackle saloons into a wilderness that swallowed men whole and spat out their bones. The year was 1887, and the small frontier town clung to existence like a stubborn weed in the cracked earth of the American West. Jake Sullivan rode in from the east, his silhouette dark against the burning sky. Dust rose in small clouds beneath his horse's hooves. A bay mare that had seen better days but still carried herself with the dignity of a mount that had crossed many miles. The man himself was lean and weathered, somewhere past 30 but not yet 40, with the kind of face that had been carved by wind and hardship rather than time alone. His clothes were practical, worn leather chaps over faded denim, a gray shirt that had once been white, and a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over eyes the color of storm clouds. Those eyes held shadows, not the kind cast by his hat brim, but deeper ones that spoke of nights spent looking over his shoulder and mornings that came too soon after sleepless vigils. His gun belt sat easy on his hips, the Colt .45 worn smooth where his palm had rested countless times. Everything about him whispered of a man who had ridden too far and seen too much, yet couldn't stop moving forward because standing still meant letting the past catch up. The town watched him come. From behind grimy windows and half-open doors, the citizens of Cedar Ridge took his measure. Mrs. Henderson paused in sweeping her boarding house steps, her broom forgotten as she squinted at the stranger. Old Pete, nursing his third whiskey at the Broken Wheel Saloon, pressed his nose to the glass and muttered something that made the other patrons turn to look. Even the mangy dogs that usually fought over scraps in the alley seemed to sense the arrival of something different, slinking into shadows with their tails low. At the edge of town, where the blacksmith shop stood like a fortress of iron and fire, Emma Thornton worked the bellows with steady rhythm. The forge glowed orange hot, casting dancing shadows across her face as she hammered a horseshoe into shape. She was 25 and unmarried, a fact that set tongues wagging from one end of Cedar Ridge to the other. Her father, Thomas Thornton, lay in the back room of their shop, his body broken by a horse's kick 3 winters past, his spirit worn down by the knowledge that his daughter had sacrificed her youth to keep his business alive. Emma possessed the kind of beauty that seemed at odds with her profession. High cheekbones that caught the firelight, eyes the color of sage honey, and hair like burnished copper that she kept pinned severely back from her face. Her arms were strong from years at the forge, her hands calloused but graceful. She wore men's trousers under her leather apron, another scandal that fed the gossip mill, but practicality had long since won out over propriety in her world. The sound of hoofbeats made her look up from her work. Through the open door of the smithy, she watched the stranger ride past. Their eyes met for a moment, his gray and guarded, hers amber and curious, and something electric passed between them. It was the kind of look that lasted only seconds, but felt like minutes, the kind that made the air seem to thicken and the world narrow down to just 2 people amid the dust and dying light. Jake touched the brim of his hat, a gesture both polite and dismissive, and continued toward the center of town. Emma found herself holding her breath until he passed from view, then shook her head and returned to her work with more force than necessary. The clang of hammer on anvil rang out like a bell, sharp and clear in the evening air. "You see that drifter ride in?" Martha Clearwater's voice cut through Emma's concentration 20 minutes later. The shopkeeper's wife stood in the doorway, her thin face pinched with the pleasure of having news to share. Dangerous-looking sort. Sarah Henderson says she won't rent to him, not with that look in his eyes. Emma wiped sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of soot. "Mrs. Henderson says that about every stranger who isn't wearing a parson's collar. This one's different." Martha's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, though they were alone. Jenny Morrison was out at the Jenkins place last week, and she heard tell of a man matching his description. Killed 3 men up in Colorado territory. They say he's running from the law. They say a lot of things. Emma turned back to the forge, pumping the bellows to stir the coals. Half of them untrue. Martha sniffed, affronted. Well, I suppose you'd know all about what people say. Wouldn't you? A woman doing man's work, wearing trousers like some dance hall girl. Your poor father must turn in his bed every night, knowing what you've become. The words stung. As they were meant to. Emma's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice level. My father sleeps well, knowing we have food on the table and a roof over our heads. That's more than some can say. Mark my words, Martha continued, undeterred. No good will come of that stranger. Men like him bring nothing but trouble. You do well to keep your distance, though Lord knows you've never been one to follow good advice. After Martha left, trailing disapproval like perfume, Emma found herself staring at the horseshoe cooling on the anvil. The metal had taken shape under her hammer, but her mind wandered to gray eyes and the way the stranger had sat his horse, easy but alert, like a cat ready to spring. She'd seen drifters before. Cedar Ridge attracted them like flies to honey, men seeking fortune or running from it, but something about this one was different. The whispers had already started by the time she closed up the shop for the night. Walking the short distance to Garrison's general store for supplies, she caught fragments of conversation that died when she passed. Killed a man in Denver, robbed a bank in Cheyenne, gunslinger from Texas. The stories grew with each telling, as they always did in small towns where entertainment was scarce and imagination plentiful. At the store, she found Jake Sullivan purchasing ammunition and trail supplies. He stood at the counter, counting out coins with deliberate precision, while Mr. Garrison watched nervously from behind his spectacles. The other customers had retreated to the edges of the store, pretending to examine goods while stealing glances at the stranger. Emma went about her business, selecting flour and coffee, a new file for the shop. She was acutely aware of his presence, the way he moved with economy and purpose, never quite turning his back to the door. When she approached the counter, he stepped aside to let her pass, and she caught the scent of leather and trail dust, underlaid with something else, gunpowder, perhaps, or just the indefinable smell of distance. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and roughened by dust or disuse. "Sir?" she replied, meeting his eyes directly. Up close, she could see the fine lines around them, the kind carved by squinting into too many suns. A thin scar ran from his left temple into his hairline, pale against his weathered skin. "Jake Sullivan," he offered, surprising her. Drifters rarely gave their names freely. "Emma Thornton." She hefted her purchases, preparing to leave. "The blacksmith," he said. It wasn't a question. "That's right." He studied her for a moment, taking in the soot under her nails, the strength in her arms, the direct way she met his gaze. "My horse threw a shoe about 5 miles out. I'll be bringing her by in the morning, if you'll be open." "First light," she confirmed. "I'll have the forge hot." Something flickered in his eyes. Amusement, perhaps, or respect. "I'll be there." Emma left the store with her heart beating faster than it should. Behind her, she heard Mr. Garrison's nervous voice resume, asking how long the stranger planned to stay. "Just passing through," came the reply. "1 night, maybe 2, no longer." The words followed her home through the darkening streets. 1 night. It was what all drifters said, what they all meant. Cedar Ridge was no one's destination, merely a waypoint on the journey to somewhere else. She'd watched them come and go for years. These restless men with their secrets and their shadows, never staying long enough to matter. But as she prepared her father's supper and listened to his labored breathing from the back room, Emma found herself thinking about morning, about the forge fire and the sound of hoofbeats approaching. She thought about gray eyes that held too many stories and hands that counted coins like a man who knew their value. Outside, the desert night descended like a curtain, bringing with it the chirp of crickets and the distant howl of coyotes. The stars emerged one by one, cold and bright in the vast sky. And somewhere in town, in a room at the boarding house that Sarah Henderson had eventually rented to him, despite her misgivings, Jake Sullivan sat by the window, cleaning his gun and watching the street below. He'd meant what he said about one night. He always meant it. Towns like Cedar Ridge were dangerous for men like him, too small to hide in, too quick to judge. But as he worked oil into the cult's mechanism, he found himself thinking about amber eyes that didn't flinch and a woman who wore trousers and worked a forge like she was born to it. One night, he reminded himself. Two at most. Then back on the trail before anyone could telegraph his description to the wrong people, before the past caught up and painted the dusty streets red. It was how he lived, how he survived, but for the first time in longer than he could remember. The thought of leaving felt like something to regret rather than relief, and that, he knew, was the most dangerous feeling of all. The Sagebrush Inn sat at the corner of Main and 2nd Street, its weathered boards groaning under the weight of years and secrets. Sarah Henderson had finally relented, giving Jake Sullivan the room at the end of the upstairs hall, the one farthest from the other guests, with a window that overlooked both the main street and the alley behind. It was the kind of room a careful man would choose, and misses. Henderson had noticed. By noon the next day, the entire town knew about the stranger who'd paid for 3 nights in advance with coins that clinked heavy like gold. The whispers grew louder with each passing hour, fed by boredom and that peculiar hunger small towns have for drama. At the Broken Wheel Saloon, men who'd never been farther than the county line spoke with authority about outlaws and gunfighters they'd supposedly known. The women gathered at the millinery shop, their voices rising and falling like birds at dawn, weaving tales from threads of speculation. "I heard he killed a federal marshal in Wyoming. Mrs. Clearwater announced to her captive audience, her needle pausing dramatically over her embroidery. "Shot him dead in broad daylight and rode off with the posse on his heels." "That's not what Jenny Morrison said," countered Abigail Fletcher, the banker's wife. "She heard he was a Confederate raider who never stopped fighting the war, still carrying grudges and settling scores." Emma heard it all as she went about her errands, the stories following her like dust devils down the street. She'd fixed the shoe on Jake's mare that morning as promised, working in silence while he watched from the doorway. He'd paid fair price without haggling, his hands steady as he counted out the coins, and she'd noticed the way he handled the horse, firm but gentle, like a man who understood that trust was earned, not demanded. "Fine animal," she'd said, running her hand along the mare's flank. "She's carried me far," he'd replied, and something in his tone suggested those miles hadn't all been easy ones. Now, as evening approached, Emma carried her father's supper tray to his room, finding him propped up in bed with his Bible open on his lap. Thomas Thornton had once been a bear of a man, broad-shouldered and strong, but injury and time had whittled him down to sharp angles and pale skin. His eyes, though, remained keen as they followed his daughter's movements. "You're restless tonight," he observed, setting aside his reading. Emma arranged his meal, stew and cornbread, simple but nourishing. "The town's all stirred up about the stranger. You know how people get. I know how you get," Thomas said quietly. "Saw him at the shop this morning through the window. Watched you working. Pa, I'm not blind, Emma, nor am I fool enough to think I can keep you here forever." He reached for her hand, his grip still surprisingly strong. But that man has the look of someone running from something bigger than himself. Men like that don't stop running. Not for anyone. Emma squeezed his fingers gently. "I'm not a silly girl with romantic notions. Pa, I know what I am and what I'm not." "Do you?" Thomas studied her face. "Because what you are is a woman with strength enough for two, a heart that's never been given to anyone, and dreams bigger than this forge and these 4 walls. That makes you vulnerable to men who promise different horizons." "He hasn't promised anything," Emma said. "He's just passing through." "They always are," her father murmured, releasing her hand. "Until they aren't, or until they are, and they take a piece of you with them when they go." Later, Emma stood at the forge, working late to fill an order for the livery stable. The familiar rhythm of the work usually calmed her mind, but tonight her thoughts scattered like sparks from the anvil. Through the open door, she could see the lights of the saloon, hear the tinny notes of the piano and the occasional burst of laughter. It was Saturday night in Cedar Ridge, which meant the cowboys from the surrounding ranches had ridden in to spend their pay on whiskey and cards. She was shaping a complex joint for a wagon repair when she sensed, rather than heard, someone approach. Jake Sullivan stood in the doorway, his form backlit by the street lamps. "Working late," he said. It wasn't a question. "Orders to fill." She didn't look up from her work. "Something you need?" "Thought you might want to know there's talk at the saloon. Some of the ranch hands are pretty deep in their cups, and your name came up." Emma's hammer paused mid-strike. "My name comes up regular as clockwork on Saturday nights. Let me guess, they're debating whether I'm a spinster by choice or circumstance, and making bets on who might be man enough to change my situation." "Something like that." Jake stepped into the shop, moving with that careful grace she'd noticed before, though the language was considerably less polite. "I can handle drunk cowboys. Mr. Sullivan. Been doing it for years." "I don't doubt it, but there's 3 of them, and they're working up their courage. Thought you should know." Emma set down her hammer and faced him fully. In the forge light, the planes of his face seemed carved from stone. "And what's your interest in warning me?" He considered the question, head tilted slightly. "Let's say I don't care for men who need liquor and numbers to feel brave." Before Emma could respond, voices approached from the street, loud, slurred, punctuated by harsh laughter. She recognized them. Will Garrison, the shopkeeper's nephew, Dale Crawford from the Box Tea Ranch, and Luke Henley, whose father owned the largest spread in the valley. 3 young men with too much whiskey and too little sense. "Well, well," Will called out, weaving slightly as he approached the shop. "Emma Thornton. Working late as always? Don't you know Saturday nights for socializing?" "Shop's closed. Boys," Emma said evenly. "Come back Monday if you need work done." "Aw, don't be like that." Dale stepped forward, his breath reeking of whiskey. "We're just being neighborly. Thought you might be lonely, working here all by yourself." "Got all the company I need," Emma replied, her hand moving casually toward the heavy tongs resting near the forge. Luke, the drunkest of the 3, finally noticed Jake standing in the shadows. "Who's this? You taking customers after hours? Emma, though I heard you were particular about such things." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks, but before she could respond, Jake stepped forward into the light. "The lady said the shop's closed," he said quietly. Will laughed. An ugly sound. "Lady? That's rich. You new in town, mister? This here's our resident curiosity. A woman who thinks she's a man, doing man's work, too proud to accept her place. Seems to me she knows her place just fine." Jake replied, "It's you 3 who seem lost. The saloon's back that way." Dale's hand moved toward his hip, where a gun belt sat awkwardly, like he wasn't used to wearing it. "You got a problem, stranger?" "No problem. Just pointing out that the forge is hot. The lady's armed with iron tools, and you boys are drunk enough to do something stupid. Might want to reconsider your evening plans." Luke squinted at Jake, recognition slowly dawning through the whiskey haze. "Wait a minute. You're that gunslinger everyone's talking about, the one who killed those men in Colorado." Jake's expression didn't change, but Emma saw his weight shift almost imperceptibly, balancing on the balls of his feet. Stories grow in the telling. But if you've heard even half of them, you might want to think about whether this is the hill you want to die on. The threat was delivered so casually, it took a moment to register. When it did, the 3 young men seemed to deflate. Will grabbed Dale's arm as he swayed forward. "Come on," he muttered. "Ain't worth it. Plenty of entertainment back at the Broken Wheel." They retreated with the graceless dignity of the deeply drunk, throwing dark looks over their shoulders. Emma waited until their footsteps faded before letting out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. "You didn't need to do that," she said. "Do what?" Jake moved to the forge, holding his hands out to the warmth. "I just suggested they find better entertainment, though I doubt they'll forget the insult. Men like that never do." They'll wake up tomorrow with sore heads and wounded pride. By Monday, they'll be back to their usual foolishness. Emma picked up her hammer again, needing something to do with her hands. Though I suppose I should thank you. No thanks needed. I don't like bullies. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, the forge crackling between them. Finally, Emma asked, "Is it true, what they're saying about Colorado?" Jake's gray eyes found hers across the glowing coals. "Does it matter?" "I suppose that depends on the truth of it." "Truth's a funny thing," he said. "Changes depending on who's telling it and why. But since you asked, yes, I killed 3 men in Colorado. They were trying to rob a stage I was guarding. Would have killed the passengers, including a woman and her young son. I did what I had to do. And the law? The law and justice don't always walk the same path. The men I killed had friends in high places. Sometimes being right isn't enough." Emma studied him, seeing the weight of that truth in the lines around his eyes. "So you run. I survive," he corrected. "Running implies I've got somewhere to go. Surviving means staying one step ahead until..." "Until what?" He shrugged, a gesture that seemed to encompass all the futility of his situation. "Until I don't." The honesty of it struck her like a physical blow. Here was a man who'd looked at his own ending and made peace with it, who moved through the world like a ghost already half-faded. It should have frightened her. Instead, she found herself stepping closer to the forge, closer to him. "That's no way to live," she said softly. "It's the only way I know." He met her gaze directly. "One night at a time, one town at a time, until the road runs out." The words hung between them. One night, taking on weight and meaning beyond their simple sound. Emma felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of bonds she hadn't realized were there. And if someone asked you to stop running, the question escaped before she could catch it. Jake's expression softened, showing a glimpse of the man he might have been in another life. "Then I'd have to ask what they were willing to sacrifice for a man with no future, and I'd hope they were smart enough to say nothing." He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture of farewell, and turned to go. Emma watched him walk away, his figure disappearing into the darkness beyond the forge light. The sound of the piano from the saloon drifted on the night air, mixing with the distant yip of coyotes and the whisper of wind through the desert grass. She returned to her work, but her strikes lacked conviction. The metal cooled and had to be reheated. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as she worked the bellows. One night, he'd said, one night at a time until the road ran out. But for the first time in her life, Emma Thornton found herself wondering what it would be like to follow that road, to choose the uncertainty of motion over the crushing certainty of staying still. The thought terrified her. It also made her feel more alive than she had in years. In his room at the boarding house, Jake Sullivan sat on the narrow bed, cleaning his gun with methodical precision. Through the thin walls, he could hear the other guests preparing for sleep, the creak of bed springs, the splash of water in basins, the murmur of prayers. Normal sounds of normal people living normal lives. He thought about amber eyes reflecting forge light, about strength that went deeper than muscle and bone. He thought about the way she'd stood ready to fight 3 drunk cowboys with nothing but iron tongs and determination. Most of all, he thought about her question. And if someone asked you to stop running, the answer was simple. He couldn't stop. The past would always catch up, bringing violence and death in its wake. He'd learned that lesson in blood and sorrow. The best he could do was keep moving, keep the danger focused on himself rather than innocence caught in the crossfire. But as he lay back on the lumpy mattress, listening to the night sounds of Cedar Ridge, Jake found himself doing something he hadn't done in years. He found himself wishing things could be different, that he could be the kind of man who stayed, who built instead of destroyed, who could offer a future instead of just one night. It was a dangerous thought for a dangerous man, and like all dangerous things, it had a way of taking root despite his best efforts to kill it. Outside, clouds gathered on the horizon, promising a storm by morning. The wind picked up, rattling windows and sending tumbleweeds bouncing down the empty streets like lost souls searching for home. The moon hung like a silver dollar in the desert sky, casting long shadows across the sleeping town. Emma lay wakeful in her narrow bed, listening to the night sounds, the distant howl of coyotes, the creak of wood settling, the whisper of wind through the gaps in the walls. From the next room, her father's labored breathing marked the passage of time in uneven intervals. She'd given up on sleep an hour ago, her mind too restless to find peace. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw gray ones looking back at her across the forge fire, heard that low voice saying, "One night," like it was both a promise and a warning. The encounter with the drunk cowboys had shaken something loose inside her, made her realize how precarious her position in Cedar Ridge really was. She was tolerated, needed even, but never truly accepted. The forge kept her useful. Her father's reputation kept her respectable. But what would happen when he was gone? Rising quietly, Emma wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and stepped out onto the small porch behind their living quarters. The night air was cool against her skin, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. She'd stood here countless nights, looking up at the stars and wondering if this was all there would ever be. The forge, the gossip, the gradual wearing away of dreams until nothing remained but duty and ash. A movement in the shadows caught her eye. Jake Sullivan emerged from the darkness like he was part of it, moving with that fluid grace that marked him as dangerous even in stillness. He stopped at a respectful distance, his hat in his hand. "Couldn't sleep either?" Emma asked, not really surprised to see him. "Old habits," he replied. "I like to walk the town at night, get a feel for its rhythms. You learn a lot about a place by how it sleeps." "And what have you learned about Cedar Ridge?" He moved closer, leaning against the porch post. In the moonlight, his features were softened, the hard edges blurred. It's a town holding its breath, waiting for something: prosperity, disaster, change. Nobody's quite sure which, but they're all waiting just the same. That's most frontier towns, isn't it? Built on hope and stubbornness. Maybe, but this one's different. There's an undercurrent here, like a river running beneath dry ground. You can't see it, but you can feel it if you know how to listen. He paused, studying her. You feel it too. That's why you're out here instead of sleeping like honest folk. Emma pulled her shawl tighter. Honest folk don't always sleep easy either. No, he agreed. They don't. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Jake reached into his pocket and withdrew something small. He held it out to her, a piece of carved wood, no bigger than a child's palm, shaped into the form of a running horse. "Found a piece of good pine," he said as she took it. "Hands get restless when the mind won't settle. Thought you might appreciate it, being someone who understands working with your hands." Emma turned the carving over, marveling at the detail, the flowing mane, the sense of motion captured in stillness. "It's beautiful. When did you—" "Tonight, like I said. Couldn't sleep." He shifted, suddenly seeming younger, almost uncertain. "My father taught me. Said a man should know how to create something as well as destroy. Never was much good at the creating part. But I keep trying. I'd say you're better than you think." Emma cradled the horse carefully. "Thank you. I don't get many gifts that aren't practical." "Practical has its place," Jake said. "But sometimes a person needs something with no purpose but beauty." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning neither quite dared to examine. Emma found herself stepping down from the porch, closing the distance between them until she could see the faint scar on his temple, the way his eyes looked more silver than gray in the moonlight. "Tell me about them," she said suddenly. "The family you lost?" Jake tensed, and for a moment she thought he'd walk away. Then his shoulders relaxed, surrendering to something, trust, perhaps, or just the need to speak truth into the darkness. "Mary," he said, the name rough in his throat. "My wife, and Samuel, our boy. He was 7. He looked up at the stars as if the words were written there. "It was during the war, not the fighting part, But the ugly aftermath when men used chaos as an excuse for cruelty. Bunch of raiders. Didn't matter which side they claimed. Came through our valley. I was away, hiring out my gun to protect a supply convoy. Thought I was providing for them. Emma waited, not daring to speak. They burned everything, he continued. The house, the barn, the fields. Mary tried to protect Samuel, and they... His voice cracked. I found them 3 days later. Buried them under the oak tree where Mary liked to read in the evenings. Then I started hunting. The men who did it? Every last one. Took 2 years, but I found them all. The law didn't care. Too much confusion. Too many scores being settled, so I settled it myself. He looked at her then, his eyes holding all the darkness of those years. That's when I became what I am. Not the killing. That was justice, or as close as I could get to it. But the aftermath. When I realized I didn't know how to stop. Didn't know how to be anything but a weapon looking for a target. Emma reached out without thinking, her fingers brushing his hand. That's not all you are, isn't it? He turned his hand palm up, catching her fingers gently. I've spent 10 years moving from town to town, selling my gun to whoever paid best. Protection, enforcement, sometimes things I'm not proud of. Always moving, always watching the horizon. Mary would hate what I've become. Would she? Emma challenged. Or would she understand that grief can twist a person into shapes they never meant to take? That sometimes we do what we must to survive, even when survival feels like punishment? Jake studied their joined hands. You speak like someone who knows about survival. My mother died when I was 15. Emma said, fever took her in 3 days. I watched my father break apart like shattered glass. For a while, I thought I'd lose him too, to grief, to whiskey, to simply giving up. So I learned the forge, became what this town needed me to be. Not what I wanted, not what my mother would have chosen for me, but what kept us alive. And what would you have chosen? Emma laughed, but there was no humor in it. Does it matter? I used to dream about traveling, seeing the ocean, maybe studying. There are colleges back east that take women now. But dreams are luxury, and luxury's something frontier towns don't traffic in. They could, Jake said softly. He'd turned toward her fully now, their hands still linked. Nothing stopping you but fear and habit. And my father, and the forge, and the voice in your head that sounds like Martha Clearwater telling you to know your place. His thumb traced a small circle on her palm. I recognize it because I've got my own version. Tells me I'm too dangerous to stop moving, too broken to build anything worth having. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs. Maybe those voices are right. Maybe they are. Jake agreed. Or maybe they're just scared. Of what? Of finding out what happens when we stop listening to them. He raised their joined hands, pressing his lips briefly to her knuckles, a gesture so gentle it made her throat tight. Then he released her and stepped back. I should go, he said. Dawn comes early, and you need your sleep. Jake, she stopped, not sure what she wanted to say. Stay? Run away with me. Tell me again about one night until I understand what you're really offering. He seemed to understand anyway. I know, he said simply. But knowing and doing are different things. Get some rest. Emma, whatever's stirring in this town, you'll need your strength for it. He melted back into the shadows, leaving her standing alone with a carved horse in her hand and a warmth on her skin where he touched her. Above, clouds scudded across the moon, promising change in the weather. Emma went back inside, checking on her father before returning to her room. She placed the wooden horse on the small table beside her bed, where it seemed to run forever in the flickering candlelight. Sleep, when it finally came, was filled with dreams of movement, horses galloping across endless plains, trains steaming toward distant horizons, and always, gray eyes watching from the darkness. She woke just before dawn to the sound of urgent voices in the street. Dressing quickly, she found a crowd gathering near the sheriff's office. Tom Morrison stood on the steps, his badge catching the first light of dawn, his face grim. Folks, I need you to stay calm. He was saying, yes, We've had word of trouble coming. The Jackson gang's been spotted 2 days' ride north, heading this way. Now, they might pass us by. Or they might not, interrupted Samuel Henderson. The banker? Everyone knows they hit the express office in Millville last month. We're sitting ducks here. The crowd murmured anxiously. Emma scanned the faces, looking for Jake, but didn't see him. The Jackson gang. She'd heard the name. 5 or 6 men who'd been terrorizing the territory for the better part of a year, robbing and burning their way across the frontier. We'll mount a defense. Sheriff Morrison continued. Any man who can shoot and is willing to stand. What about hiring guns? Someone called out. That stranger who rode in? Heard he's handy with a pistol. The sheriff's expression tightened. We don't need his kind of help. Brings more trouble than it solves. Now, I want volunteers to meet it. You turn away help because you don't like where it comes from? The voice came from behind Emma. She turned to see Jake standing at the edge of the crowd, dressed in dark clothes, his gun belt sitting easy on his hips. He looked like what he was. Dangerous, capable. Ready? Sheriff Morrison's hand dropped to his own weapon. Mr. Sullivan, I presume, heard plenty about you. I'm sure you have. Jake replied evenly. Question is, are you going to let pride get your people killed, or are you going to use every resource available? We don't need killers defending our town. No. Jake's smile was sharp as a blade. What exactly do you think defending means? Sheriff? You think the Jackson gang will turn around because you ask nicely? Because you're wearing a badge and standing on the moral high ground? The crowd stirred uneasily. Emma saw neighbors exchanging glances, weighing fear against prejudice. Finally, old Samuel Clemens, who ran the livery stable, spoke up. Maybe we should listen to him. Tom, my grandson lives here. I don't care who helps as long as they help. Others nodded agreement. The sheriff's face reddened, but he was a practical man beneath the pride. Fine, he said curtly. Anyone willing to stand and fight meets at the jail in an hour. We'll organize patrols, set watches. And Mr. Sullivan, you step 1 foot out of line, and gang or no gang. I'll see you in a cell. Jake touched his hat brim mockingly. Wouldn't expect anything less. Sheriff. As the crowd dispersed, Emma found herself walking beside Jake. You didn't have to antagonize him, she said. Yes, I did. Jake replied. Men like Morrison need to be pushed into making smart decisions. Otherwise, they'll choose pride over pragmatism every time. And you'll help defend the town, even though they whisper about you. Fear you? He glanced at her. I've got my reasons. Which are, maybe I'm tired of running. Maybe I figure if I'm going to make a stand somewhere, might as well be here. He paused. Or maybe there's something here worth defending. The look he gave her made her cheeks warm. Jake, don't, he said gently. Not yet. Let's see what the next few days bring. The Jackson gang might pass us by, might decide we're not worth the trouble, or they might come in guns blazing. Either way, words spoken now might be regretted later. He was right. Emma knew. But as she watched him walk toward the jail, she couldn't shake the feeling that time was running short, that whatever was building between them would have to be resolved soon, one way or another. Back at the forge, she stoked the fire and began work, the familiar rhythm soothing her nerves. But her eyes kept drifting to the door, to the street beyond where men were gathering to defend their homes. Change was coming to Cedar Ridge, riding in on horses and carried on the wind. The question was whether any of them would survive it. The sandstorm hit Cedar Ridge just after noon, rolling in from the west like a biblical plague. The sky turned the color of dried blood, and the air filled with stinging grit that found its way through every crack and crevice. Emma had seen storms before, but this one carried a malevolence that made the horses scream in their stalls and sent dogs cowering under porches. She struggled to secure the forge, wrestling with the heavy wooden shutters as the wind tried to tear them from her grasp. Sand swirled through the shop, coating everything in a fine layer of dust. The fire in the forge guttered and sparked, fighting against the wind that howled down the chimney. Emma! Her father's voice, weak but urgent, called from the back room. "The roof!" She heard it too, the ominous creaking of timber straining against the storm's fury. Racing to his room, she found him trying to rise from bed, his face twisted with effort and pain. "Stay down, Pa," she ordered, pushing him gently back. "I'll handle it." "The support beam," he gasped. "If it goes—" The crack of splitting wood cut him off. Emma looked up to see the ceiling beginning to buckle, dust and debris raining down. The main support beam, already weakened by years and weather, was giving way under the storm's assault. She grabbed her father under the arms, trying to drag him toward the door, but his dead weight was too much. The beam groaned louder, and she knew they had seconds at most. The door burst open, and Jake Sullivan appeared through the swirling sand like an apparition. Without a word, he scooped Thomas Thornton up as if he weighed nothing, carrying him swiftly to the main room. Emma followed, grabbing what medicines and supplies she could. They'd barely cleared the doorway when the roof collapsed with a thunderous crash, sending a cloud of dust billowing through the shop. Emma stood frozen, staring at the wreckage of her father's room, the bed where he'd lain crushed under timber and debris. "The forge," Jake said urgently. "We need to contain it before the fire spreads." Together they fought to control the flames, using sand and water to douse the scattered coals. The storm raged around them, turning the simple task into a battle. Jake worked beside her without complaint, his movements efficient despite the chaos. When a section of wall began to give way, he braced it with his shoulder while she shored it up with iron bars. By the time the worst of the storm passed, they were both exhausted, covered in sand and soot. Thomas Thornton lay on a makeshift pallet in the corner, unconscious but breathing. The forge still stood, but barely, walls cracked, roof partially collapsed, tools scattered and buried. Emma sank onto an overturned barrel, surveying the destruction. Everything she'd worked for, everything that kept them alive, damaged in a matter of hours. "It can be rebuilt," Jake said, reading her expression. "With what?" She laughed bitterly. "We barely had enough to keep going before this. Now you have help." He moved to stand before her, his gray eyes serious. "The town needs this forge, and they know it. They'll help rebuild." "The town tolerates me. Jake, there's a difference." "Then they'll tolerate you with a new roof and sound walls." He reached out, brushing sand from her hair with surprising gentleness. "You're stronger than this storm. Emma Thornton, don't let it beat you now." His touch sparked something in her, anger, fear, longing. She couldn't tell which, maybe all three. She caught his hand, holding it against her cheek for a moment before pulling away. "Why?" she asked. "Why help us? You could have stayed safe in your room, waited it out." Could have," he agreed. "But that's not who I am, despite what this town thinks." "And who are you?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking at the destruction around them. "Right now, I'm a man who knows how to shore up a roof and rebuild a wall. That enough?" Before Emma could answer, voices approached from outside. Sheriff Morrison appeared in the doorway, followed by several townsmen. His eyes took in the damage, Jake's presence, and Emma's proximity to the stranger. "Heard the crash," the sheriff said. "Anyone hurt?" "My father needs the doctor," Emma replied. "The roof collapsed in his room." Morrison nodded, sending one of the men running for Doc Winters. Then his attention fixed on Jake. "Appreciate you helping out. Sullivan, but the storm's passing. Might be best if you—" "Sheriff," old Samuel Clemens interrupted, pushing past the younger men. "My stable's half gone. The Hendersons lost their chicken coop, and the church steeple's lying in the middle of Main Street. We need every able body we can get." "The man's right," added Ben Cooper, the telegraph operator. "Storm like this, we pull together or we don't pull through." Morrison's jaw tightened, but he nodded curtly. "Fine, but I'm keeping order here. Understood?" As the men dispersed to assess damage throughout town, Jake turned to Emma. "I'll help board up what we can. Keep the weather out until proper repairs can be made." You don't have to. Emma? Her name on his lips stopped her protest. Let me help. It's what people do. Is it what you do? She challenged. Or is this about that one night of yours? Something flickered in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or regret. Maybe I'm trying to remember what it's like to build instead of destroy. Maybe that scares me more than any gang of outlaws. He picked up a hammer from the scattered tools. Either way, that roof won't fix itself. They worked through the afternoon as the storm finally blew itself out, leaving the town covered in a layer of red sand like dried blood. Other townspeople came by to help or assess damage, and Emma noticed something changing in how they looked at Jake. He worked without complaint, lifting heavy beams, sharing his water with others, offering practical suggestions born from obvious experience with construction. Learned a thing or two building shelters in the army, he said when Samuel Clemens commented on his skill. Amazing what stays with you. Doc Winters arrived to tend Thomas, setting up a temporary sick room in what remained of the living quarters. He needs rest and care. The doctor pronounced. The stress of the move wasn't good for him, but he'll recover. Though where you'll put him with that room gone. We'll manage, Emma said firmly. Course you will. Doc Winters replied, but his eyes were worried. Emma, you know if you need, we'll manage, she repeated. As evening approached, Jake helped her rig a temporary shelter for the forge using canvas and salvaged timber. It wasn't pretty, but it would keep the worst of the weather out. Her father slept fitfully on his pallet, muttering occasionally in his sleep. He's worried about you, Jake observed, checking the canvas ties. He's always worried about me. Smart man. Jake stepped back, surveying their work. This'll hold for now, but you'll need proper repairs soon. The rains come next month. I know when the rains come, Emma snapped, exhaustion and worry making her sharp. I've lived here all my life. Remember? I remember, he said quietly. She immediately regretted her tone. I'm sorry, everything's changing so fast. The storm, the gang threat, you... Me? Emma gestured helplessly. You show up talking about one night, making me think things I shouldn't think, feel things I can't afford to feel. Then you save my father, help rebuild my shop, act like you're staying when we both know you're not. What if I was? The words seemed to surprise him as much as her. Staying, are you? He looked away, toward the horizon where the last light was fading. I don't know. I've been running so long. I'm not sure I remember how to stop. But this place... He turned back to her. You make me want to try. Jake, don't answer, he said quickly. Not yet. Too much happening. Too much unsettled. Just think about it. What it would mean if I stayed. What you'd want that to mean. He left her standing in the ruins of her shop, her heart pounding with possibilities she didn't dare name. Around them. Cedar Ridge picked up its pieces, neighbors helping neighbors, the community pulling together as it always did in crisis. But Emma barely noticed, her mind spinning with questions that had no safe answers. That night, she sat beside her father's pallet, keeping watch. He woke occasionally, his eyes focusing with difficulty. The stranger, he said during one lucid moment. He saved us. Yes, Emma agreed. Dangerous thing, being saved by a man like that. Thomas murmured, makes you think he might be more than what he seems. Maybe he is. Her father's hand found hers. Or maybe that's the danger. Be careful, daughter. Men who live by violence, sometimes that's all they know how to bring. But as Emma looked around the damaged shop, she didn't see violence. She saw Jake's careful work shoring up the walls, the neat stack of salvaged materials he'd organized, the sturdy temporary shelter he'd built. She saw construction, not destruction. Outside, she could hear voices as the town guards Jake had helped organize took up their positions. The Jackson gang was still out there, still a threat. But for tonight, Cedar Ridge stood ready, united by storm and danger into something stronger than its individual parts. And somewhere in the darkness, a man who'd forgotten how to stop running stood watch, protecting a town that feared him and a woman who made him remember what it felt like to want a home. Emma touched the wooden horse in her pocket, feeling the smooth curves Jake had carved with hands more used to holding guns. One night, he'd said, but as she sat in the storm's aftermath, she wondered if one night could become two, then three, then a lifetime of nights strung together like stars across the desert sky. The thought terrified her. It also filled her with a wild, reckless hope that burned brighter than any forge fire. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, repairs to make, defenses to mount, decisions to face. But tonight, in the quiet after the storm, Emma allowed herself to imagine a different future. One where running wasn't the only choice and staying wasn't the same as being trapped. One night at a time, perhaps. But maybe, just maybe, all those nights could add up to something worth building on. Something stronger than storms and deeper than the scars they both carried. The desert wind whispered through the damaged walls, and Emma closed her eyes, listening to its promises and lies with equal measure. The first sign of trouble came with the dawn, smoke rising black against the pink sky from the direction of the Hendricks Ranch, 5 miles outside town. Jake spotted it from his position on the roof of the general store, where he'd been keeping watch. He was down and running toward the sheriff's office before the alarm bell started ringing. They hit the Hendricks place, he reported tersely to Morrison, who was stumbling out of the jail, suspenders hanging loose. Fire's big. They're sending a message. Get the men, Morrison ordered. Suddenly all business. We ride in 10 minutes. By the time they reached the ranch, there was nothing left but charred timber and dying embers. Ben Hendricks sat in the dirt, cradling his wife Martha, both covered in soot but alive. Their barn was gone, along with their grain stores and most of their livestock. 5 of them, Ben managed to say. Maybe 6. Came just before dawn. Said Cedar Ridge was next unless we paid tribute. $20,000. 20,000, Morrison spat. Might as well ask for the moon. That's the point, Jake said quietly, studying the tracks. They don't want money. They want fear. This is about breaking the town's spirit before they ride in. Young Will Patterson, one of the volunteers, spoke up nervously. Maybe we should pay better than what? Jake rounded on him. You think men like Jackson stop at one payment? Give them $20,000 today. They'll want $40 tomorrow. And when you can't pay, they'll take everything anyway, along with your dignity and probably your lives. Easy for you to say, Will shot back. You don't have family here. Property? No, Jake agreed, his voice deadly quiet. I don't. What I have is experience with men like Jackson. They understand one thing, force. You show weakness, they'll tear you apart like wolves on a lamb. So what do you suggest? Morrison asked, though it clearly galled him to seek Jake's counsel. Jake knelt by the tracks, reading the story written in the disturbed earth. They're cocky, sloppy. Rode out northeast, but they'll circle back. Probably hold up at Skeleton Canyon. It's defensive. Good sight lines. Water nearby. He stood. Decision made. We don't wait for them to come to us. We hunt. Hunt? Morrison frowned. We're townspeople, not a posse. You want to defend your town? Jake's eyes swept the gathered men. Then stop thinking like shopkeepers and start thinking like survivors. They expect you to cower behind your walls. Wait for them to choose the time and place. Instead, we hit them when they're not ready. Emma was working at the forge when the men returned to town, trying to repair essential tools with a limited setup. She looked up as Jake approached, noting the grim set of his jaw. How bad? She asked. Bad enough. Morrison's calling a town meeting, trying to decide whether to pay or fight. And you think fighting's the answer? Jake picked up a horseshoe, testing its weight. I think running and paying are just slower ways of dying. At least fighting gives you a chance. A chance? Emma hammered a piece of metal with perhaps more force than necessary. You know what the women are saying? That you're using our trouble to set yourself up as some kind of warlord. That once Jackson's gone, you'll take his place. Maybe they're right, Jake said evenly. Maybe violence does corrupt everything it touches. But right now, Violence is riding toward this town whether you invited it or not. Question is, do you meet it with empty hands or loaded guns? Before Emma could respond, the alarm bell rang again. 3 sharp peals, the signal for town meeting. She banked the forge and followed the stream of people toward the church, the only building large enough to hold everyone. The meeting was chaos from the start. Half the town wanted to pay, led by banker Henderson, who insisted they could raise the money. The other half, bolstered by Jake's earlier words, argued for resistance. Voices rose higher and higher, neighbor turning against neighbor. Enough! Emma surprised herself by standing, her voice cutting through the noise. While you all argue, the Jackson gang gets closer. We need a decision. What would you have us do, Miss Thornton? Martha Clearwater's voice dripped sarcasm. Perhaps you and your friend have a plan. Emma felt heat rise in her cheeks, but stood her ground. I'd have us act like the people who built this town. Our grandparents didn't run from Apache raids or desert storms. They stood and fought for what was theirs. Your grandparents are dead, someone called out. Yes, Emma agreed. But they died free, on land they claimed and held. What are you willing to die for? Because make no mistake, Jackson will kill some of us whether we pay or not. The question is whether those deaths mean something. Jake stood slowly, drawing every eye. The lady's right. I've seen what the Jackson gang leaves behind. They don't just take money, they take everything. Your pride, your safety, your future. You pay them off, you're just buying a slower death. So says the killer. Banker Henderson spat. Of course you want violence. It's all you know. You're right, Jake said, and his admission stunned the room silent. Violence is what I know. I've lived it, breathed it, dealt it out, and had it dealt to me. I've got more blood on my hands than any man should, but that also means I know its cost. He looked around the room, meeting eyes that wanted to look away. I know what it takes to stand against men like Jackson, and I know what happens when you don't. Then teach us, Samuel Clemens said suddenly. The old man stood with difficulty, leaning on his cane. If violence is coming whether we like it or not, teach us how to meet it. Pa, no, his son protested. But Samuel waved him off. I'm 73 years old, he said. I've lived my life, but my grandchildren are here, my family's future. If this man knows how to protect them, then I'll learn what he has to teach. One by one, others stood. Ben Cooper, Will Patterson, despite his earlier fears, even Doc Winters, though his hands were meant for healing. In the end, about 20 men volunteered, along with a handful of women who refused to be left out of their own defense. Morrison, seeing which way the wind blew, stepped forward. All right, but we do this legal-like. I'm deputizing anyone who volunteers. You'll follow orders, mine and Mr. Sullivan's. When it comes to tactics, anyone can't abide that. There's the door. No one left. Jake nodded once, then began issuing orders with the crisp efficiency of a man who'd done this before. First priority is defense. Barricades at both ends of Main Street. Shooters on the roofs. Second is intelligence. I need scouts out at first light. Tracking movement. Third is supplies. Ammunition, medical, food and water for a siege. What about the women and children? Someone asked. Church is the strongest building, Jake said. Stone walls, good sight lines. Anyone who can't or won't fight gathers there. He paused. And we'll need medical supplies ready. Doc, Mrs. Thornton. I'll need you to organize that. Emma noticed he'd said Mrs. Thornton, formally, keeping distance between them in public. But his eyes found hers for a moment, conveying things words couldn't. The town exploded into activity. Men who'd been arguing minutes before now worked side by side, building barricades from overturned wagons and feed sacks filled with sand. Women organized supplies, torn between pride at being included and fear of what was coming. Emma threw herself into preparing medical supplies, but her mind kept wandering to Jake, watching him transform from drifter to leader. He moved among the volunteers with patient efficiency, correcting grips on rifles, explaining sight lines, turning shopkeepers into something resembling fighters. He's good at this, Doc Winters observed, rolling bandages beside her. Too good, maybe. Meaning? Men don't get that comfortable with coming violence unless they've lived in it a long time. Makes me wonder what we're inviting into our town. Emma's hands stilled on the lint she was preparing. Would you rather face Jackson without him? No, Doc admitted. But that doesn't mean I'm easy with it. Violence is like infection. Emma, sometimes you need to cut off a limb to save the patient, but that doesn't mean you celebrate the amputation. Night fell with the town transformed. Cedar Ridge looked like a military camp, with watchfires burning and armed men walking patrols. Jake had pushed them hard, but even he had to admit they'd responded better than expected. He found Emma at the forge, using the work to burn off nervous energy. You should get some rest, he said. Couldn't sleep if I tried. She glanced at him. You've done this before. Turned civilians into fighters. During the war, sometimes. Never liked it. Farmers and shopkeepers shouldn't have to learn killing. He picked up a cooling horseshoe, turning it in his hands. But sometimes the world doesn't give you choices. Is that what this is for you? No choice. Jake set down the horseshoe carefully. I had a choice. Could have ridden out this morning, left you all to face Jackson alone. Still could. But you won't. No. He met her eyes. I won't. Because of your sense of justice? Because you hate men like Jackson? Because of you? The words hung between them like a challenge. Because for the first time in 10 years, I've found something worth standing still for, even if it kills me. Emma felt her breath catch. Jake, I know what I am. Emma, I know what I bring. After this is over, if we survive, I'll go if you ask. But right now, I need you to know why I'm staying. She stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse beating in his throat. And if I don't ask you to go, then we'll face whatever comes next, together. He raised his hand to her cheek, thumb brushing across her cheekbone. One night at a time, until all those nights add up to something worth calling a life. Emma turned her face into his palm, allowing herself this moment of weakness. Tomorrow, Jackson would come. Some of them would die, but tonight, in the forge's dying light, she let herself believe in possibilities. Stay, she whispered. Whatever happens, stay. Jake pulled her close, and she felt the tremor run through him. This man who faced death without flinching, shaking at the prospect of hope. His lips found hers, gentle at first, then desperate, as if trying to pour a lifetime of loneliness into a single kiss. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Emma saw moisture in his eyes. I'll try, he promised. God help me, I'll try. Outside, a coyote howled, and the wind carried the scent of smoke from distant fires. The Jackson gang was out there, waiting, planning. But inside the forge, two damaged souls found strength in each other, building something that might, just might, prove stronger than the violence heading their way. Dawn would bring blood and thunder. But for now, for this one night, they had each other. And sometimes, Emma thought, that was enough to build a future on. Sometimes, it was everything. The aftermath of battle hung over Cedar Ridge like smoke from a funeral pyre. Dawn revealed the cost of their victory. 2 dead townsmen, half a dozen wounded, and the dusty main street littered with the debris of violence. The Jackson gang had come at first light, 6 men strong, expecting easy prey. They'd found instead a town with teeth, led by a man who knew how to bite back. Jake stood over the body of Tom Jackson himself, the outlaw's face frozen in surprise. The notorious gang leader had died with Jake's bullet in his chest, cut down in the middle of Main Street while trying to rally his scattered men. The surviving gang members had fled into the desert, pursued by Sheriff Morrison and a handful of volunteers. You saved us, Banker Henderson said, approaching cautiously. The same man who'd called Jake a killer now looked at him with something approaching respect. I was wrong about... No, Jake cut him off, holstering his gun. You weren't wrong. I am a killer. Today just happened to work in your favor." Emma emerged from the church, her apron stained with blood from tending the wounded. She'd worked through the battle, her steady hands stitching flesh and setting bones while bullets flew outside. Now she surveyed the scene with weary eyes, taking in the bodies, the damage, the way Jake stood apart from the celebrating townspeople. "It's over," someone said, clapping Jake on the shoulder. "You did it." "It's never over," Jake replied quietly. "There's always another Jackson, another gang. Violence doesn't end, it just takes a breath." As if to prove his point, the morning stage arrived in a cloud of dust, and from it stepped a man whose presence killed the celebration faster than a bucket of cold water. He wore a black suit despite the heat, a federal marshal's badge gleaming on his vest, and his eyes found Jake immediately. "Jake Sullivan," the marshal called out, his voice carrying clearly across the street. "Also known as Jake Wheeler, Jake Morrison, and half a dozen other names. I'm Marshal Franklin Gates, and I'm here to arrest you for the murder of one Calvin Marsh in Denver, Colorado." The street fell silent. Emma felt her heart drop even as her mind rebelled. Not now. Not after everything they'd survived. Jake turned slowly, hands carefully visible. "Marshal, heard you might be coming. Then you know why I'm here. You can come quietly, or we can do this the hard way. Either way, you're coming with me." Sheriff Morrison stepped forward. "Now hold on. Marshal, this man just saved our town. Whatever happened in Denver, what happened in Denver was murder." Gates interrupted. "Man shot Calvin Marsh in cold blood, in front of witnesses." "Calvin Marsh was about to force himself on a woman," Jake said evenly. "I asked him to stop. He drew on me. I was faster." That's not how his friends tell it, and Marsh's father is a territorial judge. You know how this plays out. "Sullivan." Emma found herself moving before she'd made the conscious decision, placing herself between Jake and the marshal. "You can't take him, not without hearing our side." Gates's eyes narrowed. "Ma'am, I'd advise you to step aside. This is federal business." "This is our business," Samuel Clemens said, moving to stand beside Emma. Others followed. Doc Winters, Ben Cooper, even Banker Henderson. Soon, half the town stood between Jake and the marshal. "You people don't understand," Gates said, frustration creeping into his voice. "This man is wanted. There's a warrant. I have a duty. And we have a duty to the man who saved our lives." Emma shot back. "Where was federal law when the Jackson gang was terrorizing the territory? Where were you when they burned the Hendricks Ranch?" "That's not—" "Jake Sullivan stood with us when no one else would," she continued, her voice rising. "He taught us to defend ourselves, risked his life for people who whispered behind his back. If that's not character enough to earn a fair hearing, then what is?" Gates studied the crowd, calculating odds. He was one man, federal authority or not, facing a town that had just learned it could fight. There's still the matter of the warrant. Warrants can be challenged. Doc Winters said, "Witnesses can be found. The truth has a way of coming out when people are willing to look for it." "You'd harbor a fugitive." "We'd protect a neighbor," Morrison said, and Emma was surprised to hear the sheriff taking Jake's side. "Man's earned that much." Gates was silent for a long moment, then sighed. "I'll wire Denver. Explain the situation. Maybe something can be worked out, but—" He pointed at Jake. "You try to run, and I'll hunt you down myself. Understood?" Jake nodded once. "I'm not running. Not anymore." As the crowd dispersed, Emma found Jake standing alone by the forge, staring at the temporary walls they'd built together. "You knew he was coming," she said. It wasn't a question. "Suspected. Word travels fast when there's money involved." He turned to her. "I should have told you." "Yes, you should have." She moved closer. "But I understand why you didn't. You thought you'd be gone before it mattered." "I thought a lot of things." Jake's hand found hers. "Never thought a town would stand up for me. Never thought I'd want them to." "What really happened in Denver?" Jake's jaw tightened. "What I said. Calvin Marsh was the kind of man who took what he wanted: money, property, women. Thought his father's position made him untouchable. The woman he was, bothering. She was a widow, trying to run a boarding house, make an honest living. Marsh wouldn't take no for an answer. "So you stopped him?" "I killed him," Jake corrected. "Could have wounded him. Maybe, could have tried another way. But I saw my Mary in that woman's eyes. Saw what happens when men like Marsh aren't stopped. So I stopped him permanently." Emma absorbed this, understanding the weight he carried. "And now?" "Now I wait. See if Gates can find witnesses willing to testify against a judge's son. See if the truth matters more than politics." He squeezed her hand. "See if the life I'm trying to build here can outlast the one I'm trying to leave behind." Over the next days, the town worked to repair the damage from both storm and battle. Jake threw himself into the labor, but Emma could see the tension in him, the way his eyes tracked Marshal Gates's movements. The federal man had taken a room at the boarding house, making his presence felt without being overtly threatening. Thomas Thornton, gaining strength daily, watched it all from his makeshift bed. "The marshal's been asking questions," he told Emma one evening. "About Jake, about you, about what kind of man we think he is. And what do you tell him? The truth. That Jake Sullivan saved my life, protected my daughter, and stood for this town when he could have run." Thomas studied her face. "Question is, what happens when the past can't be outrun anymore?" "Then we face it," Emma said firmly. "Together. Dangerous thing, betting your future on a man with that much history. Everything's dangerous out here. Pa, at least with Jake, I know where the danger comes from." 3 days later, a telegram arrived that changed everything. Marshal Gates read it twice, his expression unreadable, then sought out Jake at the forge where he was helping Emma repair the roof. "Interesting news from Denver," Gates announced. "Seems 3 women came forward after hearing about your arrest warrant. Told stories about Calvin Marsh that his father worked hard to keep quiet. One of them was the widow you defended." Jake climbed down from the roof slowly. And Judge Marsh has withdrawn the warrant. Seems he's more interested in preserving his son's reputation, such as it was, than pursuing a case that would drag his name through mud." Gates folded the telegram carefully. "You're a free man. Sullivan, at least as far as Denver's concerned." Emma felt relief flood through her, but Jake's expression remained guarded. "There are other warrants, other places." "Maybe," Gates agreed. "But I only care about the ones that cross my desk, and right now, my desk is clean." He touched his hat brim. "I'll be leaving on tomorrow's stage. Try to keep your nose clean. Sullivan, not every marshal will care about context." After Gates left, Jake stood still for so long Emma thought he might have stopped breathing. Then he turned to her, and she saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Hope, raw and frightening. "I could stay," he said wonderingly. "Actually stay. Build something instead of running from the wreckage. Is that what you want?" "What I want." He pulled her close, heedless of who might see. "What I want is to wake up in the same place more than 3 nights running, to know people's names and have them glad to know mine, to work with my hands for building, not destroying." His voice dropped. "What I want is you, Emma Thornton, if you'll have me." Emma's answer was in her kiss, fierce and claiming, a promise made without words. When they broke apart, she saw tears on his cheeks, this hard man who'd faced death without flinching, undone by the possibility of life. "One night at a time," she whispered, echoing his own words back to him. "One night at a time," he agreed, until they all blur together into something worth calling home. The sun set over Cedar Ridge, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. The town bore scars from its trials, buildings damaged, lives lost, innocence shed, but it had survived, grown stronger, found its spine, and at its heart, in a forge being rebuilt with patience and hope. 2 souls who'd thought themselves too damaged for love discovered that sometimes the broken pieces fit together better than the whole ever did. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be those who doubted, those who whispered, those who waited for Jake to revert to type. The past would always shadow him, and Emma would always carry the weight of choosing a dangerous man. But tonight, as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, none of that mattered. What mattered was the sound of hammers rebuilding, neighbors helping neighbors, and the quiet breathing of a town learning to live without fear. What mattered was that Jake Sullivan had stopped running, and Emma Thornton had started living. And, in the desert night, with coyotes calling and the wind whispering secrets, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The sound of approaching horses woke Cedar Ridge just after midnight. Not the steady clip-clop of honest travelers, but the thunder of many hooves riding hard. Jake was already dressed and armed when the alarm bell started ringing. His instincts honed by years of survival pulling him from sleep at the first vibration of danger. Emma met him at the forge, her father's old rifle in her hands. How many? 8, maybe 10. Jake checked his ammunition. Movements economical and practiced. This isn't random. The Jackson gang had friends. Sheriff Morrison appeared, breathing hard from running. Sentries report riders coming from the south. They're not trying to hide. They want us to know they're coming, Jake said grimly. Want us afraid, making mistakes. Sheriff, get everyone to defensive positions. Emma, the church. I'm not hiding in the church, she interrupted. Not this time. Jake started to argue, then saw the determination in her eyes. Then stay close, and if I tell you to run, you run, no arguments. The riders came into view under the cold starlight, 9 men, hard-faced and armed, led by a giant of a man with a scarred face and dead eyes. They stopped just outside rifle range, their leader riding forward alone. Name's Marcus Jackson, he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. Tom was my brother. Your brother was a murderer and a thief, Morrison shouted back. He got what he deserved. Maybe so, Marcus agreed, surprising them. Tom always was too greedy for his own good, but blood is blood, and debts must be paid. His eyes found Jake even in the darkness. I know you, Sullivan. Heard about you for years. The man who can't stop running, can't stop killing. I've stopped, Jake replied, stepping into view. Your move, Marcus laughed. A sound like grinding stone. Have you now? Found yourself a town to protect. Maybe a woman to warm your bed. Think you can wash the blood off your hands with good deeds. I think your brother came here looking for easy prey and found something else. You want to make the same mistake. That's your choice. Oh, I'm not here for the town, Marcus said. Cedar Ridge can rot for all I care. I'm here for you, Sullivan. You and me. Sunrise, east of town where the old cottonwood stand. You win. My boys ride away. No harm to anyone. I win. He shrugged. Well, you won't care what happens then. No. Emma stepped forward before Jake could respond. You don't get to come here and demand. Emma, Jake said quietly, not taking his eyes off Marcus. He's offering terms. That's more than his brother did. Terms? She turned on him. Jake, you can't. It's the only way, he said. Otherwise it's a bloodbath. How many more townspeople die defending me? How many orphans do we make? He finally looked at her, and she saw the resolution in his eyes. This is my fight. Always has been. One man's word against another, Marcus said. Sunrise. Don't be late. The riders wheeled and vanished into the darkness, leaving the town in tense silence. Jake turned to face the gathered defenders, seeing fear, anger, and something else. Respect. You don't have to do this, Morrison said. We can fight them together. And lose how many? 3, 5, 10? Jake shook his head. I brought enough death to this town. Time I faced my own debts. He walked away, leaving them staring after him. Emma followed, catching up at the forge. You're not thinking straight, she said. Marcus Jackson isn't some drunk cowboy. He's a killer. So am I. Jake began checking his weapons with methodical care. Different is, I'm tired of it. Win or lose, this ends tomorrow. And if you lose? He turned to her then. and she saw not fear but a terrible peace in his eyes. "Then I die knowing you're safe, that the town's safe. That's more than I ever thought I'd have." "That's not enough," Emma said fiercely. "Not for me." Jake set down his gun and took her hands. "Emma, listen to me. My whole life since Mary died has been about running, from the law, from memories, from myself. Only thing that stopped me was you. You made me believe I could be more than a weapon, more than a ghost, but that doesn't erase what I was. I don't care what you were. You should." His grip tightened. "Marcus is right about one thing. I've got blood on my hands. Some deserved it. Like Tom Jackson and Calvin Marsh. Others were just men doing what they thought was right, standing between me and whatever I was hunting. I can't wash that clean." Emma pulled her hands free and framed his face, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to live, to fight smart instead of proud, to come back to me. And if I can't, if this is how it ends, then I'll know you faced it standing up," she said. "But Jake Sullivan, if you die on me out of some misguided sense of honor, I'll never forgive you. Despite everything," he smiled. "Fair enough." They spent the remaining hours before dawn in the forge, not speaking much, just being together. Jake showed her things, how he maintained his weapons, tricks for quick draws, signs to watch for in a gunfight. Emma recognized it for what it was, a man trying to leave something of himself behind, just in case. As the eastern sky began to lighten, the town gathered, word had spread, and no one wanted to miss what might be the last act of the drama that had consumed Cedar Ridge for days. Jake walked through them, Emma at his side, accepting nods and murmured words of support. At the edge of town, Thomas Thornton waited in a borrowed wagon, wrapped in blankets but determined to witness whatever came. "Sullivan," he called out. Jake paused. "Mr. Thornton, you saved my daughter, saved my life. Man does that, he's family." Thomas extended his hand, and Jake took it, feeling the tremor of age and illness, but also the strength beneath. "You come back, you hear? That's an order from your future father-in-law." Jake's throat tightened. "Yes, sir." The cottonwoods stood like sentinels against the brightening sky, their leaves whispering secrets in the morning breeze. Marcus Jackson waited there with his men arranged behind him, far enough back to show they wouldn't interfere, but close enough to act if treachery occurred. "Wasn't sure you'd come," Marcus said as Jake approached. "Lot of men would have run." "I'm done running." "So you said." Marcus unbuckled his gun belt, checking the weapon one last time. "You know, I studied you. Sullivan. After Tom started raiding in your territory, I made it my business to know who might stand against him. Jake Sullivan, soldier, gunfighter, ghost, man who lost everything and decided to take it out on the world. That who you think I am? That who you were?" Marcus holstered his weapon. "Question is, who are you now?" Jake thought about Emma, about the town that had stood for him, about the forge waiting to be rebuilt and the life waiting to be lived. "I'm the man who's going to stop you from hurting these people." "Maybe." Marcus stepped into position. "Or maybe you're just another corpse waiting to fall. Time to find out." They faced each other across 20 paces of dusty ground, the rising sun painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. Jake felt the familiar calm descend, the world narrowing to essentials. Hand, gun, target. But underneath it, something new stirred. Not the cold purpose of a killer, but the desperate need of a man with something to lose. "On 3, Marcus said. 1. Jake saw Emma in his peripheral vision, standing straight and proud despite the fear he knew she felt. 2. The town held its breath, waiting. 3. 2 guns cleared leather with blinding speed. The reports came so close together they sounded like one extended roar. For a heartbeat, both men stood frozen. Then Marcus Jackson took a step backward, looking down at the spreading red stain on his chest. "Well," he said conversationally, That's that, then. He dropped to his knees, then fell forward. His men stirred restlessly, hands moving toward weapons. Stand down, Jake commanded, his gun still in his hand, a thin line of blood showing where Marcus's bullet had creased his ribs. Your boss offered terms. He lost. You want to break his word over his body? The Jackson gang exchanged looks. Then their segundo, a weathered man named Foster, stepped forward. Marcus was a hard man, but honest. We'll ride out, like he promised. He looked down at the body. You want us to take him? Take him. Jake said, bury him proper. Man deserves that much. As the gang prepared to leave, Foster paused beside Jake. You're fast. Sullivan? Maybe the fastest I've seen. But speed ain't what won this. No. Marcus was faster. His bullet hit first. Foster gestured at Jake's wound. Inch to the right. You'd be dead. But you didn't flinch, didn't let it throw your aim. That ain't speed. That's will. The will to finish what you start, no matter the cost. Or maybe just the will to live, Jake said quietly. Foster nodded. Same thing. Sometimes. The Jackson gang rode out as the sun climbed higher, taking their dead leader and their threat with them. Jake stood watching until they disappeared. Then his knees buckled. Emma was there to catch him, her hands already working to examine the wound. Just a graze, he said. Shut up, she told him, but her voice was thick with relief. Just shut up and let me work. The town descended on them then, voices raised in celebration and relief. They carried Jake back like a conquering hero, though he protested he could walk. At the forge, Doc Winters cleaned and bandaged the wound while Emma hovered, alternating between scolding Jake for his recklessness and touching him to reassure herself he was real. It's finished, Morrison said, offering his hand. Whatever you were before, Sullivan, you're one of us now. Cedar Ridge takes care of its own. Jake shook the offered hand, then looked around at the faces surrounding him, faces that had gone from suspicion to acceptance, from fear to trust. Thank you, he said simply. Later, as the celebrations continued and the town began to believe it might actually have a future, Jake and Emma found themselves alone at the forge. The afternoon sun slanted through the damaged roof, painting everything in warm light. So, Emma said, what now? Now. Jake tested his side, wincing slightly. Now we rebuild. The forge, the town, everything the storms tore down. We make it stronger than before. And us. He pulled her close, careful of his wound. Your father mentioned something about me being his future son-in-law. Seemed pretty certain about it. Did he now? Emma tried to look stern but couldn't hide her smile. Mighty presumptuous of him. Mighty. Jake agreed. Of course. If a man were to ask properly. If a man were to ask, Emma said. A woman might say yes, assuming he was planning to stick around. I'm done running, Jake said, and the words carried the weight of truth. This is home now. You're home. She kissed him then, there in the forge where it had all begun, with the sound of hammers rebuilding in the distance and the promise of tomorrow no longer a threat, but a gift. Outside, Cedar Ridge continued its transformation from a town waiting to die to a community choosing to live. The Jackson threat was ended, the storm damage would be repaired, and Jake Sullivan, gunfighter, drifter, lost soul, had found his place at last. It hadn't been easy. Nothing worthwhile ever was. But as the sun set on another day in the desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Jake knew with bone-deep certainty that he was exactly where he belonged. The running was over. The building had begun. And for the first time in 10 years, Jake Sullivan looked forward to tomorrow. The dawn came gentle to Cedar Ridge, painting the desert in soft pastels that seemed to wash away the harshness of recent days. Jake Sullivan stood at the newly rebuilt forge, running his hand along the solid walls that had risen from destruction. 3 weeks had passed since the showdown with Marcus Jackson. 3 weeks of hammering and sawing, of neighbors working side by side to rebuild what storm and violence had torn down. The forge was better now than before. Stronger foundations, thicker walls, a proper ventilation system that Jake had designed based on something he'd seen back east. It was built to last, built by people who intended to stay. Admiring your handiwork, Emma's voice came from behind him, warm with affection. Jake turned to find her carrying 2 cups of coffee, the morning light catching the copper in her hair. She wore a new dress, blue calico that brought out her eyes, but her hands still bore the calluses of honest work. Our handiwork, he corrected, accepting the coffee gratefully. Whole town pitched in, led by you. She leaned against him, careful of his still healing wound. Jake Sullivan, carpenter and community organizer. Who would have thought? Not me, he admitted. Month ago. I couldn't imagine staying anywhere longer than a week. Now. He gestured at the forge, the town beyond, the life taking shape around them. Now I can't imagine leaving. The transformation had been remarkable, not just in the buildings, but in the people. Jake had gone from dangerous stranger to respected citizen, his skills with more than just a gun proving invaluable in the rebuilding. He'd shown young Will Patterson how to frame a roof properly, taught Ben Cooper's son to shoot straight, but more importantly, when not to shoot at all. Even Martha Clearwater had grudgingly admitted he was good for the town, which from her was practically a declaration of love. Letter came on yesterday's stage, Emma said, producing an envelope from her pocket. From Denver. Jake tensed slightly, old habits dying hard. Oh? From a Mrs. Catherine Walsh, the widow you defended from Calvin Marsh. Emma had already read it. They kept no secrets now. She wanted to thank you, said she's managing well with her boarding house. Her testimony to Marshal Gates helped clear your name. Good, Jake said quietly. She deserves peace. She also mentioned she's been in correspondence with other women Marsh hurt. They're working to change some laws, make it easier for women to get justice. Emma looked up at him. You started something. I stopped something, Jake corrected. They're the ones building from it. Sheriff Morrison appeared around the corner, moving with more ease around Jake now that they'd shed blood together. Morning, folks. Jake, got a minute? Sheriff? Town council met last night. We want to offer you a position. Deputy sheriff, official-like, with pay and everything. Morrison held up a hand before Jake could protest. I know what you're thinking, but hear me out. Cedar Ridge is growing. The railroad's talking about putting a spur line through next year. We'll need good men to keep order. Men who know how to handle trouble without making more of it. Jake was quiet for a long moment. I've spent most of my life on the wrong side of the law. Sheriff, maybe that's what qualifies you for the right side. Morrison said, you know how outlaws think, how they move, and you've shown you can defend without destroying. Town needs that. Can I think about it? Take your time. Offer stands. Morrison touched his hat to Emma and moved on. Deputy Sullivan. Emma mused. Has a ring to it. So does Mr. Thornton. Jake replied, which made her blush. They'd been married the previous week in a simple ceremony at the church, with half the town in attendance. Thomas Thornton had walked Emma down the aisle, leaning heavily on his cane but beaming with pride. Even the traveling preacher had commented on how the tough frontier town seemed softer somehow, more hopeful. Pa wants to talk to you, Emma said. He's at the house, working on something. They found Thomas in the small workshop Jake had built beside their new home, another community project that had seen the whole town turn out. The older man was carving something, his hands steady despite his body's weakness. Jake, good. Need your opinion on this. Thomas held up an intricate wooden sign. Thornton and Sullivan, Blacksmith and Forge. Jake's throat tightened. Thomas, don't argue. The older man interrupted. I won't last forever, and this business needs to survive me. You've got good hands and a better head. Besides, his eyes twinkled, someone needs to keep Emma from working herself to death. I heard that, Emma called from the doorway. Meant you too, Thomas replied. He fixed Jake with a serious look. I've watched you these past weeks. Son, Watched you build and teach and protect without destroying. That's a rare thing in a man who's lived by the gun. I'm trying to be better, Jake said simply. No, Thomas corrected. You're succeeding at being better. Difference matters. Later that afternoon, Jake was working at the forge. He'd taken to helping Emma with the simpler tasks, finding unexpected satisfaction in shaping metal for plowshares instead of weapons, when a familiar figure appeared. Samuel Clemens, moving slowly but steadily with his cane. Mr. Clemens. Jake greeted him. Setting down his hammer, Jake. The old man studied him with knowing eyes. You remember what I told you during the town meeting? About my grandchildren? Yes, sir. My grandson wants to be like you when he grows up. Used to worry me. Now, he smiled. Now I think maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing. The you that you are now. I mean, man who builds instead of tears down. I'm honored, Mr. Clemens. But let me finish. I'm old. Jake. Seen a lot of men come through this territory. Hunters, killers, heroes, cowards. You're the first I've seen successfully change from one to the other. That gives the rest of us hope. After Clemens left, Jake stood quiet in the forge, thinking about transformation, about the malleability of iron and men. Emma found him there as the sun began to set, painting the desert in those spectacular colors that never grew old. Deep thoughts? She asked. Thinking about change, how some things that seem permanent aren't, and some things that seem temporary last forever. Like what? Like one night? He pulled her close, remembering that first meeting, the tension and attraction sparking between them like heated metal. Was supposed to be just one night in Cedar Ridge. Now it's been dozens of nights. Emma finished. And there'll be hundreds more, thousands, God willing. Jake agreed. They stood together watching the sun set. The town quiet around them. The threats were gone, for now. There would be others. Jake knew. The frontier was like that, always testing, always dangerous. But Cedar Ridge had proven it could stand against whatever came, and Jake had found his place in that stand. You're going to accept Morrison's offer? Emma said. It wasn't a question. Probably. Town needs protecting, and I'm good at it. Might as well make it official. Deputy Jake Sullivan, she said again, smiling. Protector of the innocent, builder of forges, carver of wooden horses, husband of the strongest woman in the territory, Jake added, which earned him a kiss. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they walked back to their home, their permanent home, with solid walls and a foundation built to last. Inside, Thomas was reading by lamplight, the wooden sign propped nearby waiting to be hung. The small carved horse Jake had given Emma sat on the mantel, no longer running but finally at rest. One night, Emma murmured, understanding now what Jake had really been offering that first time, not limitation but possibility, not ending but beginning. Every night, Jake corrected, and knew it for truth. Outside, the desert wind whispered its eternal stories, but for once Jake wasn't listening for danger in its voice. He was home, truly home, in a place built by shared struggle and mutual trust. The drifter had found his anchor, the fighter had found his peace, and the man who'd thought himself too broken for love had discovered that sometimes the cracked places were where the light got in. Cedar Ridge slept peaceful under the stars, and Jake Sullivan, former ghost, former runner, former lost soul, slept beside his wife in the home they'd built together, dreaming not of the roads behind but of all the tomorrows ahead. The forge fire had been banked for the night, but it would blaze again come morning. There was work to do, lives to build, a future to shape with patient hands and willing hearts. And Jake would be there for all of it, one night at a time, until all those nights became a lifetime. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. Where are you experiencing this tale? Please comment below and let's connect. Don't forget to subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Emma and Jake's journey. Your stories and reactions make this community special.